I'm about to take you on a journey that might just explain everything you've been feeling but couldn't put into words. A journey that Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, mapped out long before the modern wave of spiritual awakening hit the mainstream. If you've ever felt like you're losing your mind, breaking apart, or waking up to something so vast it terrifies and excites you at the same time, this is for you. And let me warn you right now, if you're brave enough to keep watching, you might start to see your life in a way you've never seen it before. Because the signs of a spiritual awakening aren't always pretty, and they're almost never what we expect. But they are real, and they are powerful.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Imagine this: you wake up one morning and something feels different. The world looks the same, but you feel like a stranger in your own life. The things that used to matter just don't anymore. You can't explain it, but there's a restlessness in your soul. That's where it begins. That's the first crack in the shell of your ego. And Jung would say, this isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. But it doesn't come gently. It comes like an earthquake inside your psyche. The ground shifts. The structures of your identity begin to crumble. Most people panic. They try to go back to sleep. But you're starting to wake up. And here's the first sign: a deep, almost unbearable sense that something is missing, even when everything seems fine on the outside. You could have the job, the relationship, the house, the success, but it all starts to feel hollow. This isn't depression, it's disillusionment. The illusion is dissolving. The persona you built to survive the world is no longer enough to carry the truth of who you are. Jung called this the collision between the ego and the self. And it's not a gentle meeting, it's a confrontation. The soul is knocking, and it won't stop. And then comes the second sign: your dreams become strange, vivid, symbolic, and sometimes terrifying. You begin to see images that don't make sense to your rational mind, but they stir something ancient in you. A serpent, a tower collapsing, a door that never opens, a child crying in the dark. These aren't just dreams, they're messages. Jung believed the unconscious speaks in symbols, and in times of awakening, it starts speaking louder than ever. Are you listening, or are you still brushing it off as nonsense? The third sign is subtle but powerful. You begin to feel an overwhelming pull towards solitude, introspection, and silence. Not because you hate people, but because the noise of the world becomes unbearable. You need space to hear your own soul. You might find yourself stepping back from social media, leaving conversations early, even questioning friendships that once defined you. It's not that you're isolating, your inner world is expanding, and it demands your attention. Jung would say this is the call of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond the collective mask. And this leads into the fourth sign. You begin to question everything you've been taught to believe about God, about society, about success, about yourself. Nothing feels certain anymore. But this isn't confusion, it's the beginning of real clarity. Because before you can know your truth, you have to dismantle the lies. Jung warned that the collective consciousness is full of inherited assumptions. And awakening means you begin to shed them, one by one, like dead skin. You stop living according to someone else's script. You start writing your own. The fifth sign is often the scariest. You experience emotional chaos, mood swings, even what feels like existential despair. One moment you feel blissful, connected to everything. The next you feel lost, empty, broken. This isn't instability. This is the psyche rearranging itself. The ego is losing control, and the self is rising. Think of it like a psychological rebirth, painful, messy, but necessary. And just like birth, you can't control the contractions. You can only breathe through them. Then comes the sixth sign, and this one changes everything. You begin to experience synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that defy logic. You think of someone and they call you. You keep seeing the same number everywhere. You ask a question and the answer appears in a song lyric, a conversation, a book that falls off a shelf. Jung coined the term synchronicity because he knew these weren't accidents. They're signs that the inner and outer worlds are starting to align. The unconscious is spilling into the conscious. Reality itself starts to feel alive, intelligent, responsive. And here's where it gets mystical. The seventh sign is not something you can fake. You begin to feel a deep connection to nature, to animals, to the planet, to life itself. You may cry watching the wind move through trees. You may feel overwhelmed by the intelligence of a bird building a nest. But you begin to see that everything is interconnected. The separation between you and the world begins to dissolve. Jung believed that the self, the deepest part of us, is not just personal, but cosmic. It connects us to a greater whole, and when that connection opens, it changes everything. The eighth sign is raw but liberating. You no longer fear your shadow, you start to integrate it. You begin to see your own darkness, not as a threat, but as a teacher. You face your jealousy, your rage, your need to control, your wounds. You no longer project them onto others. You own them, you hold them, you love them into integration. Jung said the shadow is 90% pure gold, not because it's pleasant, but because it holds the parts of you that were rejected, hidden, suppressed. And every time you bring light to that darkness, you reclaim your power. The ninth sign is deeply personal. You feel a call to change your life, not out of ambition, but out of alignment. You might leave a job, end a relationship, move to a new place. Not because you're running away, but because your soul is leading the way. You start to make decisions based on intuition, not fear, on resonance, not obligation. You begin to trust something deeper than logic. And even when it doesn't make sense to others, you know in your bones it's right. Jung believed that when the ego serves the self, your life becomes a path, not just a series of events, but a meaningful journey. And finally, the 10th sign, you begin to feel moments of profound peace, presence, and purpose even in the middle of chaos. These moments don't last forever, but they leave a mark. You taste the truth. You glimpse the vastness. You know, without knowing how, that you are exactly where you need to be. And that knowing becomes your anchor. You stop needing to convince anyone of anything. You stop needing to prove yourself. You simply live, breathe, and become. But now I need to ask you the question that only you can answer. Which of these signs are you experiencing right now? Not vaguely, not later, right now. Because if even one of these is stirring in your life, you're already on the path. You're already awakening. And the question is no longer, what's happening to me? The question is, am I willing to trust the process? Carl Jung didn't give us a step-by-step manual. He gave us something more precious, a map of the soul. And if you're feeling lost, it's because you're in the middle of that map. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're not crazy. You're cracking open. And the pain, the confusion, the unraveling, they're not signs of failure. They're the signs of a spiritual awakening, and once you see them for what they are, you can stop resisting. You can start participating. This is where the real journey begins, where the ego bows to the self, where the persona fades and the soul rises, where the illusions dissolve and the truth emerges. And it's not always easy, but it is always worth it. Because the world doesn't need more people who are asleep. It needs people who are awake, who are alive, who are whole, who are willing to walk through the fire of transformation and come out radiant on the other side. So I'll leave you with this. What if everything falling apart in your life is actually your soul coming together? What if the pain is not a punishment, but an invitation? What if you stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What is this awakening within me?" If you're still here, then something inside you has already begun shifting. You're not just interested in spiritual awakening, you're living it. And while Jung never used the term awakening, in the way modern spirituality does, what he described the confrontation with the unconscious, the emergence of the self, the process of individuation, was exactly that. A spiritual awakening is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And now, as we go deeper, you'll begin to see that what's happening to you isn't random, and it's not madness. It's the sacred process of becoming conscious. But here's something most people won't tell you. Awakening doesn't always feel like light, but it often begins in the dark. Jung described this as the night sea journey, a descent into the shadow, the chaos, the unconscious depths of the psyche. It's terrifying, it's disorienting, but it's necessary. Because just like in alchemy, transformation begins with dissolution. The old identity must dissolve before the new self can emerge. So if you're feeling lost, confused, or like your life is falling apart, you might actually be right on track. Let's talk about what happens next. After you begin to notice the signs like disillusionment, vivid dreams, then emotional upheaval, you come to a point where you no longer trust the outer world to define your inner truth. This is the turning point, a sacred rebellion. You stop outsourcing your authority. You stop looking for answers outside of yourself, and you start listening within. This is where your inner world begins to bloom. You start to feel, maybe for the first time, that there is a deeper intelligence guiding your life. Not logic, not culture, but soul. This is where synchronicities multiply, where your intuition becomes louder than your fear, where you begin to feel energy, not just see matter. And you begin to sense that everything is connected not as a belief, but as a direct experience. Jung called this the experience of the numinous, a moment when the veil between the ordinary and the sacred dissolves. You might feel it in nature, in music, or in a dream, in a moment of stillness where time seems to stop. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but it is always real. And once you taste it, you can never go back. But here's the paradox. As your inner world expands, your outer world may begin to collapse. Relationships fall away, careers no longer make sense, your priorities shift, and people around you might not understand. They might call you crazy, distant, selfish, or lost. But this is part of the process. You're shedding the skin of who you were. And that shedding is painful, it's lonely, but it's also liberating. You begin to realize that the life you had was built on unconscious patterns, inherited beliefs, and societal scripts. And now, You're writing a new story, a conscious one. Jung believed that most people never complete this journey. They get stuck in the persona, the mask they wear to please the world. They never meet their shadow. They never reclaim their projections. They never integrate their inner opposites. And so they live half lives, comfortable maybe, but not conscious. But you're different. You've begun. And now the only question is, will you finish? Let me ask you something that might change everything. What if the anxiety you feel isn't a sign of disorder, but a message from your soul? What if your depression isn't a malfunction, but a descent into the underworld, where your lost power waits to be reclaimed? What if your confusion is actually clarity trying to emerge through the cracks in your ego? You see, awakening is not about feeling good all the time. It's about becoming real. It's about facing what you've avoided, feeling what you've suppressed, and remembering what you've forgotten. And Jung knew this better than anyone. He didn't offer cheap positivity. He offered depth. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the essence of awakening, not escaping the darkness, but integrating it, owning it, and in doing so becoming whole. At this stage, you may begin to experience what mystics call the dark night of the soul, but it's not depression in the clinical sense. It's an existential void, a falling away of all meaning, a silence so deep it echoes. This is the death of the ego's illusion of control, and it's terrifying, but it's also sacred. Because in that silence, the voice of the self begins to speak, not in words, but in symbols, in feelings, or in sudden clarity, in an unshakable knowing that you are not who you thought you were, and that's a good thing. During this time, it's crucial to be gentle with yourself, to stop trying to fix what is unraveling, to allow the old self to die with grace, to surrender to the process even when you have no idea where it's leading. Because the self, the true center of your psyche, is not interested in your comfort. It's interested in your wholeness. And sometimes that means chaos. Sometimes that means loss. But always it means truth. And truth has a strange way of reorganizing your life. Suddenly you start attracting different people, different opportunities, different experiences. Not because you're trying to manifest them, but because your energy has changed. Your frequency has shifted. You're no longer living in survival mode, you're living in alignment. And that alignment doesn't come from effort. It comes from allowing, from trusting, from listening. One of the most beautiful signs of awakening is when you begin to feel compassion for the parts of yourself you used to judge. The fear, the pride, the neediness, the anger, they become teachers, not enemies. You begin to realize that nothing within you is against you. Everything is part of the whole. Everything belongs. And when you begin to live from that space of inner inclusivity, the war inside you ends. And when the war ends inside, peace begins outside. This is the alchemical goal. Jung spoke of the transmutation of suffering into wisdom, but not by avoiding it, but by entering it consciously, by feeling it fully, by staying present through the fire. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. You become the fire. You don't just survive the awakening, you embody it. You become a living transmission of it. And people feel that. They may not understand it, but they feel it. Your presence changes rooms. Your silence speaks volumes. Your life becomes a mirror that reflects others back to themselves. And that is the ultimate purpose of awakening, not just to heal yourself, but to help others remember their own light. Not by preaching, not by fixing, but by being, by embodying, by living in truth so deeply that others feel safe to do the same. That's how real change happens, not through force, through frequency. So now I'll ask you again, what are you awakening to? What truth is trying to surface through the cracks in your old identity? What have you been resisting that's actually your liberation? Because the truth is, awakening isn't something that happens once. It's a spiral, a rhythm, a dance. And every time you think you've arrived, a deeper layer calls you inward. This is not a linear path. It's a sacred unfolding. And the only way to walk it is one breath, one step, one moment of courage at a time. You are not here to fit in. You are here to wake up, to remember, to reclaim, to rise. And even when it hurts, even when it's messy, even when you doubt yourself, you are exactly where you need to be. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that becoming is the most powerful thing you can offer the world. So I leave you with this. If your life right now is asking you to let go of everything you thought you were, will you answer the call? Will you trust what's emerging, even if you can't name it yet? Will you walk into the unknown, not because it's safe, but because your soul is calling you there? You've made it this far, and that means something profound. Your soul is ready. Ready to face the unknown, ready to remember the truth you've always carried deep inside you. If the first part of this awakening was about recognizing the signs, and the second part was about surrendering to the process, then this is the part where we step into embodiment, where the wisdom doesn't just stay in the mind but begins to live in your breath, your choices, your reality. Because awakening is not about escaping life, it's about entering it more fully, more consciously, more courageously than ever before. So here we are, and maybe you're still feeling overwhelmed. Maybe there's fear. That's okay. Jung would say that fear is the beginning of all transformation, because fear shows us where the ego clings. And wherever the ego clings is exactly where the soul is trying to set you free. You see, most of us spend our lives running from discomfort, from uncertainty, from pain. But awakening flips that on its head. It asks us to turn toward the very things we were taught to avoid. And in doing so, we find the doorways to liberation. One of the most powerful shifts that happens during a spiritual awakening is that you begin to realize that everything is a mirror. Not metaphorically, literally. The people who trigger you, the situations that frustrate you, the emotions that overwhelm you, they're all reflections of your own unconscious material. Jung said it simply, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's not a platitude. That's a practice. When you start to see life this way, nothing is wasted. Every encounter becomes a lesson. Every moment becomes sacred. Imagine living like that. Imagine waking up each day not trying to control life, but to listen to it, to read it, to feel it as a living text written just for you. That's what awakening gives you. Not certainty, but presence. Not perfection, but awareness. And in that awareness, you begin to realize something astonishing. You are not separate from life. You are not a stranger here. You are life, awakening to itself. And that realization changes everything. You stop needing to be right. You start wanting to be real. You stop chasing validation. You start embodying truth. And that truth is not an idea, it's an energy. a frequency, a vibration that others can feel. When you speak from this place, your words carry more than meaning, they carry medicine. When you move from this place, your actions ripple through the collective field. You become a tuning fork for others. Not because you're trying to fix them, but because you've aligned with your own center. And in a world full of noise, that alignment is revolutionary. But let's not romanticize it. Embodiment is messy. It's not about floating in bliss. It's about grounding the light into your body, your relationships, your work, your everyday life. It's about speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes. It's about setting boundaries that honor your soul, not your fear. It's about choosing integrity over approval, presence over productivity, depth over distraction. And sometimes it means losing people, losing comfort, losing what no longer matches your frequency. That's one of the hardest truths of awakening. Not everyone will come with you. Some people will fall away. Some chapters will close, not because you failed, but because you outgrew them. And that grief is real, but so is the freedom that follows. Because on the other side of letting go is space for what truly resonates. Space for relationships that see you, hold you, challenge you to rise. Jung would call this the integration of the opposites, not just light and dark, but death and rebirth, loss and gain, chaos and order. He believed that the self could only be realized when these opposites were brought together in conscious harmony. And that means we can't just chase the light, but we have to own the dark. We have to stop pretending we're above our pain. We have to make peace with our humanity. Because the soul doesn't want you to be perfect. It wants you to be whole. And wholeness isn't something you find. It's something you remember, something you reclaim. It's been there the whole time, buried under expectations, wounds, and conditioning. Awakening is the process of excavation, of digging through the rubble of who you thought you were to uncover the treasure of who you've always been. And that treasure isn't just for you, it's for the world. Because once you reclaim it, you carry it everywhere you go. You become a lighthouse in a stormy sea. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're anchored in your own being. Think about that. Think about what it means to live from your being, not your doing. To create from inspiration, not obligation. But to love from overflow, not emptiness. What would your relationships look like if you stopped trying to get something and started sharing something? What would your work look like if it wasn't about success, but about service? What would your life feel like if you stopped performing and started embodying? These are not hypothetical questions. These are the invitations awakening places before us. And how we answer them determines the quality of our life, not in terms of comfort, but in terms of meaning. Because a life lived in truth, even with all its uncertainties, is infinitely more fulfilling than a life built on illusion. And here's something else Jung understood deeply. The collective needs your awakening, not your perfection, your awakening. Your willingness to live with your eyes open, your heart open, your soul open. Because every time one person chooses awareness over denial, presence over distraction, love over fear, it ripples. It shifts the field. It changes what's possible for everyone. You might not see the impact, but it's there. Every moment you choose consciousness, you are doing sacred work. So don't underestimate yourself. Don't think this journey is just about you and your healing. It's about all of us. We're in this together. And the more of us who awaken, the more we create a new paradigm, not just in theory, but in reality. In a world where empathy is stronger than ego, where wisdom is valued more than wealth, where presence is more powerful than performance. And yes, we're far from that world, but it starts here, with you, with me, with each of us choosing again and again to walk the path of awakening, not because it's easy, but because it's true. Because the alternative, sleepwalking through life, chasing illusions, avoiding our depth, is no longer acceptable. Not for you, not for any of us. So as we close this journey together, I invite you to breathe. Not just as a physical act, but as a spiritual one. Inhale the truth of who you are. Exhale the lies you've been told. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your heart beating. Feel the life moving through you. That's it. That's the miracle. Not some dramatic revelation, but just this moment. This breath. This aliveness. That's the essence of awakening. And now, I'll leave you with one final question. A question that only your soul can answer. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to awaken and started living as someone who already has? You already know. You've always known. Now it's time to live it.